Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, so it is Writing Wednesday when I answer your writing questions, craft questions, business questions, existential questions, all aspects of the writing life, because the writer is an integrated form. So all of these concerns come to bear when you start to write, as you will know if you're writing. Hi, Brenda. Good to see you. Um, so if you have questions for me today, put them in the chat. And if you have questions for me during the week, uh, I can make a Writing Wednesday around your questions. So do send me questions at my on my website, janetfitchwrites.com. Hi, Jennifer. Um, but I do have a question today, and I think, hi, Laura. People who are writing a long form will have a an interest in this. The question is, what are the hardest scenes to write? And anybody who has been writing for a while knows that there are certain kinds of scenes in certain places in stories that you might have found to be the hardest. Hi, Wendy. Welcome back. Hi, Blair. Um, what are the hardest scenes to write? Now, in my experience, with each book, there have been at least one, if not more, scenes that I had a terrible time with and redoing them. Generally, the last scene, the ending of the book, is the hardest scene to write because it needs to do a couple of things that no other scene in the book needs to do. It needs to uh, do what I call, it needs to ring the big gong. It needs to go boom, and the reverberations of that scene go all the way forward back through the book and back out, and it makes the reader want to start over again. And it ties the book together. It looks towards the future. It lands your book. So it's a very difficult scene to write, and you tend to, I tend to think of it as like making a bed. Um, if you are not good at making beds, which I am not, I'm horrible at it. It looks like, I think I've used this in at least one book. You know, it always, in Marina M, I think I've used it because she was um, working at a boarding house, and she was just saying how their beds look like they've, when she's made them, they look like they've already been slept in. Hi, Jill. Um, so it's, you shake it out and you let the sheet fall, and then it wrinkles. And so you take it off and you try it again and again and again until it falls without wrinkling. Um, in terms of finishing a book, that last scene is a very interesting one. Usually, it doesn't open up anything necessarily. Um, it adds a finishing coat, like, you know, spreading something over a glaze over the cake or something. Hi, Sarah. Um, yeah, folding a fitted sheet is metaphor for something. I'll think about where that applies. um, so the end of the book, something that has that will resonate. Um, each book had an ending that was that I've struggled with. There's sometimes a coda. Um, I sometimes I mean, I remember the hardest ending was, for Marina M. and Chimes of Lost Cathedral, one big story. Um, I had, without spoilers, it's a girl who ends up having to, make a break for the, make a break for the border. And there is a, um, concept in the book, concerning this. I think it's concerning the spiritual and art, although it might be point, line, and plain. They're two incredibly useful, interesting books, um, written by Kandinsky, the painter Kandinsky. And one of his, uh, things that he noticed, because he thought of his work as experimental, which doesn't mean just try a bunch of weird things, but think about what you're experimenting with. What have you learned? What does it reveal? And one of the things that he saw in his, paintings is that a line, I think it might be point, line, and plane, is that a line develops tension. Let's imagine this as a canvas. Um, the line develops tension as it moves towards the frame. So if you're a painter and you paint in here, not as much tension, but as you approach the frame, the line gains tension because we wonder what it's doing, what if it's going to, finish off or, um, but once the line hits the frame, all of the tension goes out of it. So, in terms of the ending of, um, uh, The Chimes of Lost Cathedral, the second book in the Marina M. Duet, she's, um, let's say she's making a run for the border. And so and I've found emigration stories, how we got out of whatever place. The stories generally are the most interesting in the milieu of before the escape. And that as soon as the escape occurs, all the energy goes out of the story. I read so many emigre diaries, when I was doing the work for the Russian book. And whenever they finally make it to the States or wherever they end up, Holland, all the energy goes out of the story. And they just, unless they're in a book of, they become just ordinary people after the escape. And it's like all the energy goes out of it. Um, so I decided to end that book right before she sets foot on foreign soil. So she's in a boat and she's about to set foot, on non Soviet ground. Um, and that's so I decided because of the, it was suggested to me by Kandinsky to stop just before the frame. And I'm satisfied with that ending. Um, my ending for White Oleander, I cast it ahead to a, um, kind of a coda where I see her, my character Astrid, I see her, um, several years ahead of the events of the book, maybe 2 years ahead, and see where she landed, although it's not going to be permanent. I see where she's landed and see she's how she's adapting to her new circumstances. And it has reverberation that goes back through the book. And I really like that. It rang the big gong. Um, in Painted Black, which was about a girl dealing with the aftermath of a suicide of her boyfriend, and she's tried every different way to deal with it, and finally she revisits the place of his, last day. And then what? I have her notice somebody who is in a kind of a desperate situation working there, and she offers her help to that person. She can't save her boyfriend, and she's come to realize that all the guilt, all the wonder, worrying, could I have forestalled this? The answer comes back no. But there is somebody she can save. So that's what rings the gong, um, is in that last bit of that chapter. Um, so the ending is always the hardest. You rewrite the ending over and over and over again until it settles. Oh, thank you. Linda says she liked the ending of Painted Black. Thank you. Um, I thought about putting a coda on Marina M. on Chimes of the Lost Cathedral, of having her abroad several years later. But I think it's all implied in who she became through the course of the novel, that we're pretty sure that she is going to find her way. So I wanted to end it before the line hit the frame. So I think endings are difficult. I think we do it over and over and over again. So I wouldn't be surprised if. So what do you find the most difficult? Um, the hardest scenes, I would say, are the emotionally um, supercharged scenes that finally get down to the nitty gritty of your book. The big emotional confrontation, revelation scene. Um, I know for, um, oh, this is interesting. Sarah says in Marina M., you have the framing device at the beginning where she's looking back with the other woman. Is that considered a half frame? I thought you'd return to that at the end, and you didn't. Yeah, I decided not to perfect it, to leave the there's an introduction where we see her many years ahead, where we see Marina M. many years ahead, in 1933, on the coast of California. So when it ends, in 1921 on the shores of Finland, um, the reader is aware that she is not going to remain in Soviet Russia. Um, but I didn't really feel the need to bring back, I didn't think that anything would be gained. It's what the reader expects. And so why would I want to do what the reader expects? They can figure that part out themselves. Um, but the most difficult scenes, besides endings, which are universally difficult, the most difficult scenes are the highly charged emotional scenes in the books. Your book, my book, anybody's book. Generally, those are the difficult scenes, and the ones that deal with the central issue of the book. So I can think of, say, um, in White Oleander. I had not, when I wrote it, I had not had a confrontation scene between um, the mother in prison for murder and um, the daughter, who is now teenager, 18, ready to go. What I had was a subplot of a boyfriend and a friend of his, and the three kids leave town they stop, they they go by the prison just because of the way out of town. They stop at the prison, and the daughter, Astrid, thinks about her mother in that prison for life, thinking about her, and then they leave. I thought that was an elegant ending, and in this world, um, many writers are afraid of being obvious. They think it's more sophisticated to not have a big emotional scene, but to try to pass by it, avoid it, um, thinking that it's too expected. They expect a big confrontation scene, so I'm not going to do it. But I was taught by a very good editor um, that you need the big emotional scene, that what I was doing was chickening out. I was afraid of writing that scene because I thought that if I screwed it up, it would ruin the book. Yeah, Blair says, I find big realization scenes are hard to give them enough gravitas. Um, I the book clearly demanded a face-to-face confrontation with the mother. This girl has been in foster care for 7 years, 8 years, 7 years, no, less, 5 years. Um, and it needed to be satisfying. The reader really was requiring a confrontation face to face. The name of the prison, Linda is asking, in White Oleander. I want to say she was at, it wasn't Norco, it was a nearby prison, but it was out there. Um, let's see. Okay, let's see if I can remember it. If it comes up, I will remember it. But I'm blanking. It's been 25 years since I've written this book, so you can understand why I might not remember the name of the prison. I think anybody who's seen it more recently, read it more recently, would probably know the name of the prison. It'll come to me. Anyway, hi Marie. I've got your question today too. So we're talking about what the uh, hardest scene to write is the big emotional conflict scene, um, the big realization scene. Uh, so I was trying to avoid this in White Oleander, and I was told by this editor that they would buy the book if I would rewrite the last chapter, the last quarter of the book, and have this confrontation scene in it. And, I was already 40, I'd been rejected for 20 years. I was not going to let a chance like this slide by. I trusted that editor. And so I did tear out a lot of elements in the last quarter of the book and then have the big confrontation scene. It was terrifying. The thing to remember uh, when you're writing a scene like that is that you have to defy what a reader expects. It's got to go in a different direction than the reader expects. And there needs to be tonal shifts. It can't just be like punch, punch, too much arguing like the way teenagers argue. Yes, no, you didn't. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. It's got to have new information. It has to have new emotional information. In the case of this big confrontation scene in White Oleander, it showed how far the young protagonist had come in the course of the book. She had a strength that she didn't have before. she's able to stand up to the antagonist in a way that she hadn't before. But there should always be a give and take. We've talked about that before. There's a way, think about the way cats fight. They don't just do 16 rounds of heavy blows. They're back and they hiss, and then they back off, and then they jump, and then they back off. It takes no time at all, and then so there's an ebb and a flow of we're getting we're being reasonable, everybody's trying to be reasonable, and then somebody pops, and then the other person comes in, and then and then you know there's a separation. Then mood is changed. Um, so think of, if you're avoiding doing a big emotional scene, um, there'll be what happens in the scene. Somebody wins, somebody loses. And if it's your big confrontation scene in a novel, you finally maybe let your protagonist come through. Um, it can't be a repetition of any other scene in the book, emotional repetition of any other scene in the book. It has to have a new emotional movement. So, my characters pretty much avoided confrontation through the book until this, and finally she's been pushed enough, and she is going to make a demand. Um, and she'll be hurt as she does it. It's not going to be some cinematic triumph. She's going to take a blow or two herself, or it's not fair and it's not believable. So you're looking at variations. Uh, people do, you can take it apart if it just terrifies you to approach that scene. You know, you can think of turns that you want it to take. You want it to deal with, what about this issue? The character finally is going to say, what about this? And then you figure out how the antagonist is going to deflect it, or when the antagonist is going to finally admit the truth of what that person is saying, and then how that is going to settle into the main character, and then where do you go from there? So you can think of it as, actors think in terms of beats, where the emotion changes, and then it changes again, and then it changes again, and it changes again. 3 to 5 beats in a scene like that. So it can help to take the scene apart and look at when, you know, what is, how is the character going to react when they come into the scene? You know, say comes in sullen, and then something happens to change the sullenness, because we're always looking for change when we're talking about scenes, pressure and change. So say the character comes in sullen, and then something pops then to anger. So then you have anger, and then where do you go from there? You always want that emotional movement. So anger, and then maybe some realization of their own culpability change. And then you have the culpability, that sense of guilt, and there might be, some information that transfers the guilt to the perpetrator, or brings them along. There might be a beat of understanding of how that happened. And then there might be another, flip to anger, a different kind of anger, a deeper kind of anger, um, as they root out the grounds of the disagreement. And then who wins, who loses. So there could be 4 little beats, 5 little beats, changes. Um, but dialogue is always people putting pressure on each other and then a shift because people don't just stand there and let somebody punch them in the face. You know, they duck, they weave, they deflect, they do all kinds of stuff. So you have to have that kind of movement inside the scene. Um, so Blair says, I end up writing the version the reader would expect and then discard it as junk. Yeah. So you're always thinking, what would 99 out of 100 people think is coming next? And then don't do it. Because you're the writer, you're there to amuse, astonish, surprise the reader always. And watch the no, you didn't, yes, you did, no, you didn't. I always loved you, you know. It's like, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. No, you didn't. Oh, remember when I bought you a ring? It's like, fuck the ring, you know. Watch out for a back and forth that doesn't escalate or break off or have a twist or a turn to it. Uh, so Brenda likes Blair's idea of discarding the expected scene. Yeah, you do. Um, uh, and do you have any methods to help you break away and open up your mind to unexpected developments? Yeah, it's just keep asking yourself, what would the average person expect her to say? And sometimes that's the first thing you think of. No, I didn't. The minute you feel it, then you stop yourself. It's like, this is what's expected. I don't want, there's got to be something else for her to say. Maybe she doesn't say anything. Maybe she pulls the power back to herself. You know, um, you killed him. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. Remember? No, you did. It's like those horrible parent-child arguments. But if you're going to have a change, maybe that child would say, would stop and think, did I do that? You know, is it possible? So we see the change that they've gone from a child's perspective to a more adult perspective. Um, but no antagonist gives up without a good, hard fight. Um, and avoid sentimentality. The big huggy. Watch out for the big huggy. You know. Uh, um, use humor. Use distraction. Sometimes people who are confronted will start a story. They'll start a story that seems to have nothing to do with what's going on, but eventually does come back around. It's important to not to be curious rather than terrified. The character is not you. It's character. And the character's job is to take some blows, and your character's job is to stay in it, stay fighting, not to curl up and die. Um, so it's not you, and that helps to remind yourself the character's not you. This is their job, is to deal with the tough stuff in their own lives. There can be a moment of humor when two people are fighting, are at odds, and it's really getting serious. Somebody might say something funny, and the other person will get it. So you see that there is something more than adversarial relationship there. Um, there's also a mutual understanding, uh, and sometimes then they completely forget that they had that moment of mutuality and go back to their animosity. But it's a it shows a little hope if somebody can say something funny and somebody else can say or think, you know, yeah, that's pretty good. It softens the moment. You don't want it to be too soft, but you want to vary it. You want to keep it varying. And then when it finally lands, if your character, whether your character wins or loses, um, something has definitely changed. And the change has been showing throughout the confrontation. Um, so there's this question of, um, let's see, um, big realizations. Big realizations, a character has a head of steam going, and they see something or say something, and then there's this emotional drop. And that's what Blair was talking about in her difficult scenes, how to give them enough weight as it drops. Um, Silence is really good. Um, you know, I think of it sometimes as the pinball ball going into the hole when it finally goes in. To let it drop, and you do that with a silence. Now, how do you portray a silence? I hate they fall silent, as you know. So I tend to go the other way and think, okay, what do you use the senses? What do you hear in a silence that you wouldn't hear if everybody was talking? You know, he didn't have a heart attack, Jane. Your father killed himself. He hung himself in the garage. Okay, I can hear somebody going through the trash outside. Sounds like paper. I hear small birds outside. I might even be able to hear my own heartbeat. A kid might go by on a skateboard. Somebody might be, it's trash day. Somebody might be going through my trash. And just allow that silence to pool. I mean, that's a way to get some gravitas into the scene. If people are always, no, I didn't, yes, you did, kind of the ping pong effect, you never get the benefit of a really good silence. But watch the ping pong effect. You do not have to respond in kind. If you just found out that the father hung himself in the garage and not having a heart attack as you'd always expected or been told, you would look at the other person and maybe have a realization, something you heard or something you notice about them. You notice how weathered your mother's face is that you didn't notice before. She was getting old. Um, you might notice something that will speak to the moment. So you might notice um, a stain on the wall that you've never noticed before. So that's, I would use the silence to get that gravitas into the scene when there's a revelation. Also, when you're bemused, say you're lying in bed, in a motel, crappy motel, and you're smoking, um, and for some reason, you're able to put two and two together of some kind of revelation about the situation of the book. and you have the silence, and maybe you have a flashback and you're thinking about something that now makes sense, and then you come back to the room with the realization that something's burning, and then you look down and you've burned a hole in the sheet because your cigarette dropped. So usually give yourself a moment for revelation is going to be a slow one. It's going to be, I have a friend who is big on a writer named Frank Conroy. I think he taught at Iowa, who called this a stop time moment. Time stops. So don't rush on. Don't hurry to have a reaction in those scenes. That's a tip for you. So, anybody else have problems with a certain kind of scene? The hardest scene to write. Yeah, another very hard scene for some people. It's going to depend, on your particular book and your particular temperament. Some people have a very hard time with multi-character dialogue scenes. That everybody has to have a point of view. There are alliances. There's internals for your point of view character, but you know, little alliances form. There's a wonderful book that I recommend to anybody called Freshwater Road by Denise Nicholas. She does an amazing, um, just in the very beginning, like second chapter, there's a really wonderful multi character dialogue chapter in a bar with like 8 people. And you see everybody so clearly, and you see who the more important people are and who the sort of sidekicks are, and the dynamics that form. Definitely worth it. So, Barbara, hi Barbara. Uh, Barbara says, I have a hard time evoking emotion. Okay. When you're evoking emotion, you can remember to use the landscape to speak to you. So if you're bereft, you can look at a leaf falling off a tree. You can look at the desiccated body of a lizard that your cat just killed. You can look at um, the house seem emptied, dusty. The world can speak for you in a to evoke emotion. Um, and then something I always talk about is the Rosetta Stone, which is where you keep track of emotion, real emotion as it comes up, and watch it, follow it through the body. So it's like if you have a slash of envy of somebody, your friend is talking about moving to Ireland, and you feel that envy. What does it feel like, and where is it in the body? And if you watch the feeling, it starts to move. So it might start out as, I don't know, envy. I'd have to look at my Rosetta Stone. But something like disappointment. Where does disappointment feel? I often feel it like here. We call it the gills. I feel the gills here tighten. And then it will move down, and be a tightness in the solar plexus. It might be, you know, hands aching, especially if you have arthritis. The body is very sensitive to the emotions. You feel in the knees. You feel, you know, to say I feel old is not as interesting as I feel my knees are aching, my back, you know, my back is aching. I can't, I don't want to sit up straight. I'm just too tired to sit up. You know, I can feel, you know, she moved her neck to get rid of the tightness. Um, Feel where the emotions are in the body and keep track of it. And so you'll have a notebook. We talked about this last week, didn't we? You'll have a notebook that you'll have the emotion on, like, two columns. Emotion on the left, disappointment, anger, fury, betrayal, envy, joy, um, mirth, whatever emotion. Do the range, don't just hit the bad ones. And then follow the emotion through the body. Where does it lodge? So you can use that. If it's the tightness in the lungs, maybe it ends up tightness in the lungs, and you can, have your character really literally gasping for air. She lit a cigarette so she could take a deep breath. I think a lot of people smoke because they really need to take a deep breath, and our society doesn't value just going outside and taking a deep breath. They have to have an excuse, so they smoke. So following the emotion in the body is extremely helpful. Laura says, I have a hard time showing the power dynamic between two people in a scene. Okay. A really good way to show power dynamic in a scene is, one, who speaks long. That always is a power thing. The person who gets to have a speech without being interrupted, that's a power position. Parents always go blah, 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 and then the kid is like, I wish they would die, in their minds. But they don't interrupt because there's a power relationship there. The lecturee is the one without the power. They sit there. But also in a dialogue scene, withholding is also a power thing. So, when you're having an argument with somebody, and somebody is pressing for an answer, do you want to be married or you not want to be married? And the person who holds the silence has the power in the scene. They don't. Maybe they decide not to say something. Maybe they play with the ball, and or turn away, or that's a power play. Upstaging is a power play. you know um, Say early on I had a story, mother and a daughter fraught, and the daughter is in a moment really trying to reach the mother and telling a story that really was important to her, sharing this with her mother, like really giving her mother a chance. And in the middle of the story, where she's really revealing something about herself, the mother looks over at another table and goes, Do you like hats? There's a woman with a hat. You like hats? Well, that's another power relationship. Person who's not going to hear what the other person has to say. Doesn't, it's going to interrupt them. It's going to redirect. That's power in a relationship. Blair says, I like as a reader when the psychological revelation in a tense scene is unexpected and sort of on a higher level, even in a different register. Yeah, that is really interesting. And sometimes somebody will say something, something will slip that they don't intend to say, and the other person gets it. It's like, oh my God, he did do it. The person maybe has been denying murdering somebody, and then just by a little unexpected bit of information that he lets slip, the other person is like, oh my God, they did it. They did do it. Here I've been defending him, and that is not true. So the unexpected, and on a higher level, or even a different register. Let's see, there's a scene in Dune where the mother almost dies and the scene moves into the son's realization the mother would never love him the way she loved his father, and he forgives her. Yeah. So that is a scene where she reveals something that he had to have been tuned in enough to see, to catch that. And then we're seeing a change from a child's point of view, who, children are very black and white, and the if that this would be unforgivable for a child. So it shows that the character has grown and is has more of an adult perspective where something heavy like that can be forgiven. So that's very good. um, so we're at the end of this, unless you have other scenes that you like, the really tense scenes that have been proved out well. Jennifer says uh, that it's been so juicy, helpful. My brain is working my story. Yeah, yeah, and it's a really good thing for all of us to remember as we have a confrontation scene. Something unexpected happens. It's like another. If you have a family drama and it's the argument between the father and the son, and they've just had it and had it. You do not want to repeat the father-son argument in a different clothing, but it's basically emotionally the same. You want to show, maybe in this one, the son is actually trying to reach the father, or in this one, the narcissistic father is actually reaching out to that kid, really trying to step away from their blindness and really trying to accept things and listen. And I can see the child sometimes cuts that off because they don't want to see they don't want to see vulnerability or complexity, and they will try to stuff that person back into the monster role. And that's a very interesting thing to do with one of these type of scenes. So thank you very much for your questions, and I wish you good writing.